Today on Adventures in Analytics from the Perception and Action podcast, an introduction to Bayes' Theorem and how it can help you win your fantasy football league. So it's time for a call to action. Hi everyone, this is Rob Gray from ASU and PerceptionAction.com. Welcome to the Perception and Action podcast, where I discuss how psychological research can be applied to improving performance, accelerating skill acquisition, and designing technologies. In this edition of Adventures in Analytics, I want to introduce Bayes' Theorem. Bayes' Theorem is a probability theory that has been applied to a wide variety of things from forecasting sports performance to predicting election outcomes. In the last decade or so, the quote-unquote Bayesian approach has also become one of the dominant theories for understanding perception and action. In future episodes, I will be looking at how it can be applied to motor control and motor learning. But in today's episode, I'm going to use the context of fantasy sports as a way to introduce the key concepts. Thomas Bayes was an 18th century mathematician and minister from England. His greatest contribution came after his death in 1761, when his Essay Towards a Problem in the Doctrine of Chances was published and its significance recognized. Bayes' theorem relies on the use of conditional probabilities. That is, it provides us a way of estimating the probability that one thing will occur, given that another thing has already occurred. This may sound like a fairly simple idea, but it is incredibly powerful because it allows our analysis to be dynamic instead of just static. So, for example, instead of just making a prediction about the likelihood of our favorite team winning the championship and sticking with it for the whole season, we can continually update our prediction as new information becomes available. To foreshadow, this is how Bayes' theory has been applied to motor learning. We try to anticipate what will happen next in an uncertain environment by accumulating perceptual information and using it to update our predictions. Let me give you a simple example to illustrate. How long will I live? Well, the average life expectancy for a male in the United States is roughly 76 years. But that number is a very static snapshot that doesn't take into account any current information. For example, I have already lived 46 years, so I must be doing something right. As I mentioned, Bayes' theorem allows you to update your probability based on current information. So to predict my life expectancy, I actually want to calculate the probability conditioned on the fact I've already lived 46 years. When I do that, my life expectancy is roughly 80. On my 66th birthday, my life expectancy would jump to 82, while if I make it to 76, the expectancy would jump to 85 years. And I could make this prediction even more accurate by taking into account other conditional variables, such as my weight, height, eating habits, etc. Bayes' theory has also been used to debunk a commonly held belief related to life expectancy, namely that married men live longer than single men. While lots of colorful theories have been put forth to explain this effect, the bulk of the difference is the result of using the static analysis I mentioned. While it is true that if you do a one-time overall analysis, married men live longer than single men, this is in a large part due to the fact that, of course, all men who die as infants or children are not married. When you look at conditional probabilities, for example, the life expectancy of a man that is currently 46, there is actually little difference. So much so that marital status is not included in most actuarial tables used by insurance companies. Okay, enough about aging. Let's dig into the formula in a bit more detail and talk about how it can be applied to fantasy sports. Okay, time to get into some calculations. Note you can follow along with these by going to perceptionaction.com/Bayes intro. In its simplest form, Bayes' theory goes as follows. Imagine the event we're trying to predict is called A, and the condition we know about is called B. The probability of A occurring, given that B has already occurred, or in other words, the probability of A given B, is the following. Probability of A given B is equal to the probability of A times the probability of B given A, all divided by the probability of B. He said, what now? Okay, let's put some numbers to this. Imagine you're trying to predict whether or not Green Bay Packers will win their next game. This season, they've won 60% of their games. So we would say that the probability they would win, or the probability of A, would be 0.6. But imagine you get a bit more information and are told by the weather forecasters that it's going to snow on game day. Again, the power of Bayes' theorem is that it allows you to be dynamic and update your prediction based on this new condition. So, we now want to calculate the probability of the Packers winning a game, event A, given that it is snowing, condition B. For this, we need to know three things. The probability of A, which is the probability that the Packers win a game, which as we said is just 0.6. The probability of the condition B, that is the probability of it snowing during a Packers game. Let's say that happens 10% of the time, so the probability is 0.1. Finally, we need to know the conditional probability of B given A. That is the probability of there being snow during a game in which the Packers won. So kind of the opposite of what we're trying to find in the first place. Let's say this is 0.12, or 12%. If we put all that together, we get the probability of the Packers winning, given that it is snowing on game day, of 0.72. Now let's look at how this can be applied to fantasy football. Imagine you're trying to decide which running back to draft first in your draft. Obviously, you're looking to pick a runner that's going to rush for over 1,000 yards. Let's use Bayes' theorem to determine whether or not the draft rankings made by different fantasy sites are a good way for predicting this. For this, I use the Yahoo Sports Fantasy Rankings. Let's call the event that a running back gains over 1,000 yards next season A1. From the past 12 years of data, using the top 50 running backs each season, the probability of A1, a 1,000-yard rusher, occurring is 0.3. Okay, now let's call the event that a running back does not gain 1,000 yards A2, which of course would be the difference, 0.7. Finally, let's call our condition, which is being ranked in the top 10 of a fantasy preseason draft, as condition B. Okay, now we have all we need to calculate our conditional probability. If you'd like to see the nitty-gritty of the calculation, please go to perceptionaction.com/Bayes intro. But to keep it simple, the value you get is 0.41. In other words, there's roughly a 40% chance a running back ranked in the top 10 of the Yahoo fantasy rankings will gain 1,000 yards in the season. This is a fairly simple example, but you can let your mind go wild with the possibility of how it could be used, comparing the effectiveness of different fantasy ranking systems, determining how likely a player is to score a touchdown after a bye week, and so on and so forth. There are actually several sites online, most of them paid, that use Bayes-type calculations to help with fantasy draft and player selection. And as I mentioned, the Bayes approach has proven to be a powerful means of understanding motor learning and perception action, which I'll be discussing in the future. Okay, the probability that I'm going to end this edition of Adventures in Analytics, given that you just heard that music, is 100%. Remember, you can find all the details about my analysis by going to perceptionaction.com/Bayes intro. Coming soon on the Perception and Action podcast, a review of the book The Arm, Inside the Billion-Dollar Mystery of the Most Valuable Commodity in Sports. This is Rob Gray from ASU. Cheers for now.
Cut you quick.